Well, welcome everybody to this week's Menlo Midweek podcast, where Phil and I are concluding our Hope for Everyone series. In many ways, this is the finish line of the series, but the start line of helping change 3% of people in the Bay Area's hearts towards Jesus and towards hope. We're so grateful for all of you that have said yes to helping out with this, whether that's through contributing through this initiative with your time or your talents. We are so grateful for you, and we cannot do the things that we do without you. So we're going to jump into this episode in just a second, but I want to say, hey, we're doing baptisms this Sunday. If you at all are considering baptisms and maybe needed that final push, this is your final push. Let someone from your campus know. Text our team at 650-600-0402. We'd love to talk to you about that. Now, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. Welcome, everybody, to the Menlo Midweek podcast. My name is Mark.
And I'm Phil.
And we are still riding the high of this past weekend, right, as in we've come down and are maybe at a low.
Yeah. It's, I think after a series like this and the months leading up to it, I, like the way I've described it to people, especially as you're like waiting for sort of initial results to come in, is it feels like you studied for an exam for months, and then you took the exam, and now you're clicking refresh on the browser while you're waiting for the exam to get graded. And so, navigating some of that, trying to have good conversations. What are the implications? And like just doing normal ministry in life. Like there's still stuff going on this week, obviously, and then services coming this weekend with baptism. And so, it's, you're just asking, I'm asking the Lord a lot, guard my heart from guilt or shame if the results aren't what I hope they would be, and guard my heart from pride if they are, and just like I am not what I do or what God accomplishes, I'm me. And so it's a unique week of discipleship in that for me.
Yes, dude.
Yeah.
Man, that makes me think about when I sent away my college applications.
For sure, yeah.
I was in between playing basketball for a junior college down in Orange County. Was talking to a couple of those like little small back east schools to play basketball as well. And then I applied to a couple Cal States, and Cal Poly being one of them. And I remember sending out those applications and then waiting. And at that time, it was like a mixture of we had the internet thing, like that was established. That's what we applied through. But it wasn't official until you got like the physical letter.
Yeah.
And so I remember one night checking and refreshing and seeing that Cal Poly and SLO accepted my application, and me going in and telling my mom, and she was like, I don't believe it.
Yeah, she needed to see it.
She needed to see it. And I was like, no, Mom, like, I'm so excited. And she's like, yes, I understand, but also we need to pump the brakes a little bit.
Let's wait till the carrier pigeon drops off the telegram.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good.
Exactly.
That's good. Yeah, so we're feeling a little of that this week, but it was good, man. It's a fun weekend, and fun to hear stories of people and to see, at campuses, we did this kind of different video thing where we could see a snapshot of campuses, like a box at every campus, and people dropping off. Although I heard that at a couple campuses, people were avoiding the one that had the camera on it, which is a whole thing. Still, it's the thought that counts. Yeah. And so it was fun to incorporate that, and then to be able to talk about a couple of stories. It's been a sweet few days. But I also think, there's no way that after that you don't feel some sort of like emotional exhaustion where you're just like, I need a minute. So thankfully, my normal week this week actually feels like rest. That's how different it is. So I'll take it. I'm thankful for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been at Menlo for almost 7 years now. I'm going to celebrate my 7 years at the end of the month.
Congratulations, dude. 7 years.
It's kind of crazy.
That is crazy.
And to my knowledge, I don't think we've ever done something live in a service that had showcased different campuses.
Oh, interesting.
We've definitely had video projects in which other campuses were represented.
Yeah.
So like worship leaders or CPs or something, like when we would open services, like for Christmas or Easter, would show like we are multi-site. These are other, other places. But I don't know if we've ever done something live in the moment that showcased what was happening at each campus as we were also doing church at that same time.
Yeah, well, and every multi-site church like Menlo is different in the way that they handle that. And Menlo, because of how unique Menlo Park is, Menlo Park has been the only campus that is designed as a broadcast sending location. And part of the audio video lighting stuff that we envision as a part of Hope for Everyone over the course of these next 3 years is actually to make every campus capable of broadcasting. Now, that doesn't mean that all the components of Menlo Park have to get replicated at every campus.
Yes.
The good news of that is, just thanks to the technology of it, if you've ever been, this is nerdy, then you probably want to hear, but if you've ever been to the basement of Menlo Park's sanctuary, there is legit like control room that feels like you're launching a spaceship. And that room actually can control, in this new world that we're talking about, any of the broadcasts from any campus. So even if you were doing something like in Saratoga or up in San Mateo or Mountain View, you would have the equipment that you need, but those feeds would just be going back to that same room, and that same room would be directing it the same way they do when it's at Menlo Park. So it's a much more cost-effective way than trying to even build up sort of portable or mobile control rooms, which is the way other people do. They'll make like a truck,
Right.
and then the truck goes to the campus that they're broadcasting
news.
from. You got it. And then the people on the truck do it, but it's obviously a significant expense to do that. So,
Interesting. Well, I'm hopeful that we could start doing more stuff like that in the future, because I just think it's so huge for the different campuses. Because not only did we see this at Menlo Park,
Right.
but we saw this in every room,
Right.
where we saw a screen full of what was happening in different rooms.
Right.
That's just a really cool way to
Yeah.
unite
And I
us.
mean, it was just a couple minutes of it, but hopefully that's that's something that isn't like a once every 20 years we do it, but it's something we just have in our arsenal. So
Yeah, it'd be really cool. So Phil, coming down from this past weekend, you mentioned at the end of this message that this one kind of had you a little bit more nervous than most.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's chat about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is always you have playing in your head like, this is what people think right now. This is the objection that people have. This is the apprehension that people have. And that's when you're like, you should join a life group. Like, you should be honest with your spouse. You should function with integrity at work. You should be known for what you're for. Like, these big themes we revisit all the time. But the idea of like, we're talking about generosity, and you should be cognizant of the fact that every dime and dollar you have is ultimately God's, and from that you should be generous towards the work of God in what he's calling us to do as a church. So if you think like, I know people are going to think kind of a way about joining a life group, well, just scale that up to 10,000 as you talk to people, some of whom, have been in church. I mean, I've talked to people in this series, some of which have been in church their entire life, and they have never financially given. It's just not a part of their faith. And, challenging to say, hey, our primary goal in this initiative was 100% participation. And so just asking people, would you ask the Lord what it is for you to give and be faithful in this? And then simply be obedient to what he's called you to do. I don't know what those numbers are. I'm just saying, would you be obedient to committing that number? And so, I think it's a new muscle for Menlo, not just like having this conversation, but then also committing, like putting it somewhere. And, it's only our finance team that sees that. And then it's all kind of built into the same system that all giving happens through. So you'll get communication, but it's all automated. And so I know that there'll be some people where they're like, hey, I'm committed, but I'm not writing it down. And you're like, okay, so we just can't do anything with that, because we're not going to function with a level of foolishness, in my opinion, where we're like, well, we're going to go buy a building because a bunch of people said they're in. Like, no. Like we need commitments together. So hopefully people heard the heart behind that of, we want God to move in the hearts of people. And if we get to 100% participation and we're still not at the number, somebody framed it this way to me today. They were talking to somebody, and that person was a longtime Menlo person, and they said, I fear what would be a failure to me is that we hit the number, but it's out of just a handful of people participating. Or they said, I think what success could be is we don't hit the number, but everyone participates. And I think, that's really how we framed this. Like, our goal is a spiritual transformation goal where the first goal is 100% participation. So I'm going to be emphasizing that in the coming weeks. And then November 10th, because we still have people that are opting in. It was kind of a 3-day weekend. Lots of people were out. So people will continue to commit. We're getting commitments every day still. and we'll process those and all that. And then on November 10th, there's some people that are giving out of stored assets, or people that are like setting up their giving. So November 10th, we're just calling Giving Weekend. I'll have a special message kind of on the heels of the election. And then I'll also announce where we are in terms of financial commitments on November 10th. So between now and then, I'll talk a little bit about what our engagement number looks like. What's the percentage of people that are regularly a part of Menlo that have said yes to this and committed? And if the goal is 100%, what do we do to move that needle?
Great.
So, yeah.
We're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Hopefully people will be putting faith into action.
Yeah, I hope so. And, I think it's been, like I said, really fun to hear conversations, not over the course of days or weeks, but like legitimately months and months of what God's done in the lives of people, and people that I was sitting down with very early in this process to just pray with, and would you seek the Lord with us about what He might be calling us to do around this, and to be in some of those same conversations with some of those same people now on this side of it is pretty special.
Yeah. So as you're going into preparing all of us and leading all of our congregation into this, how did you land on the scriptures that you landed in? The first 3 weeks of this, we were in a parable. And this week, we kind of took it in a little bit of a different direction. How'd you get there?
Yeah, so I always knew I wanted to land on this text in 1 Corinthians 9. This is one of my kind of favorite ministry philosophy anchoring passages where Paul, of anyone that would have had an excuse to sort of fade into the background and go, he could have probably self-justified, what they don't want me around. I'm the last guy that they would want to see. I'm disqualified from possibly doing something for ministry. Do you know what I've done?
Right.
And to have that guy say, even though I'm free from everything, I make myself a servant, doulos, to everyone. I become all things to all people, so that by any means necessary I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessing. To me, that's just like whatever your story is, if you have personally decided to follow Jesus and have even a cursory understanding of what He's done for you, it should be pretty quick logic to get to the same conclusion that Paul does. And it should be the motivator out of this heart of compassion, that what breaks God's heart should break our heart. And if God was willing to go so far that He would sacrifice His own Son, what are we willing to sacrifice?
Yeah.
And so, I knew I always wanted to get there at the end of the series. But then I've done a series like this before where we're kind of talking about something, and there's a number of different, like, pretty typical passages that you may go to, or stories that are helpful. I think for me, going to the 3 stories, the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son's stories, that triplet, I think really it had to do with what I feel like at Menlo we just need consistent reminding of, which is, even though sometimes the cause of the gospel can feel like a lost cause in our community, it's not. And God's not done. He hasn't given up. He's the loving Father waiting for the prodigal to return, and waiting for the older brother to realize that the relationship he's dying for, he already has. He's the one that leaves the 99 for the one. He's the one that goes looking everywhere for the lost coin. And just to be reminded that the heart of our God is that way, as sort of this, let's take some steps in realizing and remembering that for ourselves. I really felt like, there's things that you're kind of talking about more broadly, especially week 2. We just talked about kind of financial generosity in general. But I hope that it underscored for people, if your faith has become one where it's been easy to deprioritize the role in your life, investment, financial generosity, and spiritual direction for the people who are close to you physically, but far from the relationship that Jesus died to provide, we have left the pattern of what the way of Jesus is all about. And unfortunately, if you remember in that text where that triplet of parables was, Jesus is talking to 2 groups at one time. He's talking to religious leaders, and he's talking to this group, the sinners. And the religious leaders had forgotten about the sinners. They were like, we don't talk to them. They're a lost cause. We want nothing. We're good. The people that we want in the temple are getting to the temple. As a matter of fact, some of these extra rules, what they would have called the Mishnah, which was the law outside the law, or the fence is what we would translate it as today. It was in some ways keeping that class of people, the sinners, away from ever being there. There's a thing called the court of the Gentiles in the temple that was designed to be a place, because God always wanted Israel to be a light to the nations around them and be a place that even non-Jews would find God. But that court of the Gentiles is where the money changers are when Jesus comes in and he flips all the tables, right? And he says, my house should be a house of prayer. Well, he's flipping the tables because they are literally in the space where unchurched people, where Gentiles of the time were supposed to be able to pray. And we don't have money changing tables up, but I think sometimes in our philosophy and the way we think about life and ministry, we can sort of set up mental money changing tables in our priorities that elbow unchurched people out of the way we think about faith.
That was incredibly rich. I need you to break that down 30 seconds.
Sure.
How can I explain what you just explained to someone that might feel those same hesitations or feel the conviction that I feel right now, where I'm just like, man, where are my money tables?
Yeah. I just think that at the end of the day, whether we want to admit it or not, the longer that we follow Jesus, the easier it is for our circle to get smaller and smaller, with people that look like us, think like us, believe like us, follow the same maybe theological tradition as us. And it's easier, even without realizing it, for the people on the outside of that to be people that Jesus loves, that he's put us in relationship with. But we go, I don't have as much in common with them. I'm not sure how to talk to them. I'm not sure how to engage in spiritual conversations. It's easy for us to kind of write them off as a little bit of a lost cause, just like the money changers in the court for the Gentiles did, just like the religious leaders that Jesus was talking to during those parables.
Wow. And I feel like adopting that perspective goes past just how I interface with other people, but also how the actions of my life does as well. It feels like that would lead to, like what you said earlier, knowing what we're for instead of what we're against, not only in thought, but in action as well. And because of that, we allow God to get into the depths and the places and to search our hearts to help lead us to see the places in which we might not even be able to see that I'm in alignment or not in alignment with God.
Totally. Yeah. And I do think, we talk about, like, in a car, we go, oh, this car has a bad blind spot, like based on how the car was made. And I just think as Christians, we need to realize that there are some really cool and amazing things about following Jesus in community with other Christians, but there can also be these blind spots that get developed over time. And I think one of those big blind spots is just how we spend our time and energy. And after a while, everything's full with just people that look like us, think like us, believe like us, live like us. And we don't have any space left at our proverbial table of life for people that don't.
Yeah. Wow. Phil, how can we, as we're trying to be generous, not only with our lives, but also with the parts that for many of us feel the most that we want to hold on to, which is finances, how can we begin to see that as worship? You talked about that. When I hear worship, and when a lot of us hear worship, we think of singing.
Right.
And we kind of think that's the extent of our time in worship.
Totally.
How is generosity through finance also worship?
Yeah, I would say two things. One, everything that we do in our life is worship. So if you go to Romans 12, you think about one of the most famous passages that we would be transformed by the renewing of our mind, not conformed to the patterns of this world, that we would live lives of worship. And so, I think singing is worship through corporate singing is really cool. It's
corporate
amazing.
Meaning?
Like together, like a group of people, when we think about a gathering, when we come together, it's actually the part of our services that's the most difficult to export, is sort of the experience of singing together. Yeah. You can watch teacher online, you can take some next steps, you can watch another video, but what does it look like for me to experience that, to participate in a service with others? But I think that our money, if we believe what Jesus says, that wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart is, actually our generosity is likely the truest form of our worship. And whether that's and I would say, we talk about generosity in terms of what does it mean to give back? What does it mean to make a difference? But you are being generous in your life right now. Like some of you are being generous towards a vacation home. Some of you are being generous towards the car you drive.
Sure.
Some of you are being generous to a private school. Some of you are, but we're all being generous with somebody or something. And it reveals what we worship, right? If my treasure, if my treasure shows where my heart is, if my treasure shows what I treasure, then I think the challenging question is not how is it that money can show me where my worship is. It's what Keller talked about. I think I quoted it in week 2. Money's not our idol. Money reveals where our idols are. And so if you were to just kind of open up your bank account and think about how you spend the majority of your money, some of us, like what we worship is restaurants. We love restaurants. And like we just have an undisciplined way about the way we spend our money. And at the end of the day, what we realize is if our heart is where our treasure is, we just really love eating at restaurants. For other people, maybe they have like a hobby that they didn't realize it, but it's gotten out of control. For other people, maybe it's some priority that they thought was big, but it's kind of become total, right? And some of that's like deciding to live beyond our means, and we have to have a different conversation about that. I don't know what it says, right? Like when maybe your biggest expense right now is the interest on servicing debt, right? Like what were the things that you really needed, you quote unquote needed before, and you're still paying for now. Maybe even some of the things you're not using anymore. The scriptures tell us that the lendee really grows in bondage to the lender. Right? There's this like kind of principle of that. And I've watched people where it's like, oh man, I had to have this car, I had to have this boat, I had to have this house. And it put something around their neck that was so heavy that they actually end up hating the thing that they had to have. And so I think just being able to say, when I'm generous, when I live open-handed, when I live within my means, all of a sudden money can become a blessing that I see as fuel for my life, rather than a prison for me to try and keep up with everyone and everything around me.
Man, that's so good. That takes a lot of faith. It takes a lot of faith to, whether you're on the side of putting your, I need these things or this to bring me worth or happiness, or I need to keep it all just in case something does happen.
Totally.
To live in the tension of something in the middle, to then also not be pulled to either side of that spectrum, but to be pulled towards I have this now so that I can be generous.
Yeah.
That's tough, dude.
Well, that brings two stories to my mind of, so there's a guy I know well, I've known him for years, and he would say, like, if you knew what his savings was, you'd be like, oh my gosh, so he's good forever. And in his head, he thinks, I always just need a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. So he struggles with generosity because this idea of personal control, like what if this, catastrophizing the next crash, the next thing, what happens, and so he's just trying to work out every conceivable worst case scenario and be as prepared as possible for it. And, on one level, I have an emergency fund for sure.
Sure. Same.
But there's a boundary to it. Like,
Yes.
6-month emergency fund is different than 6-year, different than 60-year. If I have to start my own country, I don't have enough money for that. And then I think on the other side, I was just talking to somebody yesterday, and we were talking about generosity, and he's been very generous and has committed in a very generous way in this initiative. And he just said, he said, when you grew up with nothing, and he grew up with nothing in poverty, he said, when you grow up with nothing, I've just found that for me, and I think different people respond differently. He said, for me, it's way easier for me to live open-handed because I've already lived the worst case scenario.
Wow.
And you're like, oh my gosh, that is crazy, right? So I think you probably could find plenty of people who grew up with a lot, and they have a reason why they can be generous because they've already experienced that, somebody like him. But I think the common denominator is there will always be an excuse that we can make in the depravity of our own mind and heart about why we can't give, about why generosity should be limited. But I mean, just over and over and over. I mean, we talked about it in week 2. The number of times that money gets talked about in the scriptures is first by a mile. And it's not because God needs your money. He doesn't need your money. It's because God wants our heart. And when we give him our money, we show him that he has our heart. And so I think, I know that's kind of a new conversation for Menlo. And for some people, it's going to be a baby step. And that's totally okay. But I would not let the fact that it's a baby step make you think that it's not worth taking.
Yes. And what that can do in our formation, in our process of seeing the world as Jesus sees us, even if it's just peeling back of one of those layers of this onion.
Right.
Man. And I thought it was really refreshing, too, how we talked a little bit at the end of the message about the life of the mind.
Yeah.
And how sometimes we have, I don't want to say myself included, but we got some pretty brilliant people
Yeah, sure.
in our, that understand finance or understand, man, I need to get behind this logically and I need to be assured of this outcome before I participate.
Totally.
Yet there's a tension there of also having to trust God because in a way, assuring that is not faith.
Right.
And so I thought that was really brilliant how you brought that up.
Yeah.
And it was convicting for sure for myself, especially to think about in the ways that I am being generous. Am I being as generous as I think that I'm being?
Sure. Yeah. One, and again, we all have a paradigm that we come from, right? And it informs the way we give, and informs the way we live. And I talked about, for some people, they grew up, and I grew up in a church like this, where it kind of felt like your mind was unnecessary to your faith, that you could just turn it off. That you've heard it maybe said where people are like, "Oh, I have to turn my brain off to believe this stuff."
Right.
And you go, "Well, my faith doesn't require my brain." That's a problem, right? That's a problem. And then I think our tendency at Menlo is that sometimes our brain doesn't need our faith.
Yeah.
And we're so smart that we're like, God, actually, we figured it all out. We're good. And we sort of sand off the edges to what it means to pursue Jesus that we can't intellectually prove out.
Yeah.
And I think when we have a faith that doesn't require our mind or mind that doesn't require our faith, we are missing out on what it means when Jesus says God's looking for those who will worship him in spirit and in truth. He was talking about this exact same paradigm in the first century. They were still dealing with it there. He was talking about some subsects within the Jewish religion of different religious factions, some that were kind of all heart, some that were all mind, but it was exactly the same problem. And what was so funny is they saw each other as so terrible, but they both ended up in kind of the same dilemma.
Yeah.
And I think we can end up in the same one too.
Yeah.
So we should be careful about how much we judge others who do it different than us. And then I would say we should be ready for that faith to prompt us maybe to take some steps that we don't see stairs for yet.
Yeah, definitely. So we've talked about too how the conclusion of this series marks the ending of this, but also the starting line of so much else.
Totally.
So as we're looking forward, Phil, what's the stuff that is getting started that we can get a little bit excited about?
For sure. Yeah. So I think, a couple things, a lot of this stuff is like lead and lag. Like you do some stuff that you're not going to see yet, but you have to do it in the preliminary way.
Right.
One of the things that we're working on right now is, if you've ever noticed, it kind of depends on the campus you're at and what you see or don't see, but Ben White, who is our production lead for Central, he's kind of a wizard, to be honest.
He really is.
What he's done to make Menlo Park work and to make the broadcast work to campuses is nothing short of miraculous. But one of the big time problems that happened as COVID started, Menlo had really just gone online right beforehand. You know all this. And as a result, a lot of the things that we use are kind of like duct tape and baling wire to make it all work. And so there's some stuff in particular, how any video you see, whether it's on social media or it's in a weekend service that's like a creative story video, or the message, or if you attend Menlo Park, the worship, all of those things look like they got filmed in different places. And so some of what we're doing in the back end is to make all that much more reliable and much more consistent. And so we're working on some of those plans right now. Some of it will be determined by what funding is available and all that stuff when all the dust settles. Also, there is a company that helps churches like us design physical spaces. And so we're going to start working with that company to build plans for what students and kids' environments look like across all of Menlo, as well as what all of our hospitality kind of lobby type spaces look like. They're not the same because we have different spaces. So if you think about like Saratoga, Mountain View, and Menlo Park, our lobbies are kind of outside. They're like courtyards, and they're different. So like, how do you bring common themes to all of those so that they're all elevated and feel good, all feel like Menlo, but can all fit their spaces? And then San Mateo is obviously an inside lobby. And so how do you do that there? And then on top of that, for Mountain View and San Mateo, if we're making these changes before we've secured permanent facilities for them, what can you do that you can take with you rather than permanently invest in a building that might not be yours? And then having some conversations with folks in San Mateo and Mountain View about what does it look like to either purchase the campuses that we're currently at that we're renting, or begin exploring some others. So we got lots of teams and people working on all that stuff, and getting to as close as 100% participation as we can between now and November 10th is kind of the next major hurdle, and then we'll live within the means that the Lord provides.
That's great.
So
Phil, as we wrap up, anything from the past 4 weeks that you want to double click on? Anything that you didn't say that you wanted to say? Anything that you said that you want to say differently or reiterate?
Yeah, I think we have spent a lot of time talking about what it looks like for why the Bay Area needs this, right? We don't want to be the headliner. We want to be a footnote in the work of God in the Bay Area. We want to give away influence to see God work through not just Menlo, but through other great churches and a church network, through church planting opportunities, through key initiatives in the community. We talked a lot about like what could happen if that took place. Wouldn't that be amazing? And I believe that. I believe that to my bones. But I also think it's important to note, I would argue that like we need that at Menlo just as much. I mentioned this last week in our kind of special episode at the end of the week. Menlo Church can become Menlo Country Club really quick. And we go from really thinking about God's calling on our life to really thinking about our comfort for our life. And when we are reminded of the mission of God today, I think it really moves individually and collectively. It kind of shakes us out of a little bit of sort of a stasis point. There's been times throughout different points in history where nations or militaries that are not engaged but are really big, they get described as sleeping giants. And I think that Menlo's not asleep, but I think sometimes we can have this like, well, we're growing and we're good and our stuff's taken care of, a little bit like those religious leaders that Jesus was talking to. And I think this reminder from our Lord to us of like, wake up, O sleeper, engage. I think we need that just as much as the Bay Area needs it.
Yes, that's great. And I'm super excited for this coming weekend. We have baptisms coming up, which is an amazing way to just celebrate some of the work that God has been doing through this whole process, whether that is the morning of and people are like, I'm going to get baptized today, or the people that have let us know beforehand that are saying yes to the things that God is calling them towards. Phil, let's just give a little bit of if you're considering getting baptism, or if you're considering getting baptized, how could we encourage, or what are good things to think through as we're heading towards this weekend?
Well, and you wonder, you're like, hey, during the Capitol campaign, were there people like meeting Jesus?
Yeah.
And the crazy part is yes. Like that's like a crazy, we got people coming up that literally on a day are going, I want to follow Jesus. I want Menlo to be my church, and I want to commit to the initiative. And you're like, what? Normally that doesn't happen in a day, right? And it didn't happen for them either. God was working on them for a long time. But I think, what we say a lot around here is that, personal faith will get you to heaven. It's required, actually. Public faith brings heaven here. And so this idea of, as a believer, I'm in, I've never been baptized before. I'm going to get baptized. We get to say sort of like out loud to our community, I'm in. And I think it's this powerful reminder that God is still rescuing and redeeming people today. And that is hopefully a huge encouragement. Some of my favorite people to see experience baptism are our legacy service folks at Menlo Park.
Yeah.
Because you just see it in their eyes. It takes them back to the moment of their faith decision for many of them decades ago. And it just softens their heart again. And I think it does that for all of us, right? And I think that rhythm of just seeing people go public, oftentimes with a pretty young faith, is so fun, so encouraging to them. And so, we typically offer that for adults and students that have a personal faith that have never been baptized before through going into the tank at your campus, going underwater and coming up out of it. This time we're trying some stories via video, and some stories will be live from the tank. But I think they'll be hopefully really honoring and help underscore the individual people's stories. But then there's also an opportunity if, like, for some reason you either don't feel comfortable or don't want to go in the tank, we can also pour, I always say, like, the meaning is more important than the mode. There are people that are like, well, if you don't, the Greek word is, means to immerse, which is true, actually. Baptizomai, it's a deponent verb. But I also think, like, it wasn't a Bible word. It was just a word. And so when we get wrapped around the axle of, like, this is what it has to be, like, okay, man, like, I think we may have lost the forest through the trees a little bit here, but hopefully you have enough, there's enough avenues and opportunities for you to say yes to that at Menlo. You can reach out to Mark. You can reach out to your campus pastor. We'd love being able to facilitate that. And then, something that we've started doing in the last year and a half or so is that when we talk about baptism, we teach on baptism, we teach the gospel, and then we give people an opportunity to respond, to get baptized immediately. And, like, that's pretty consistent, actually, with scriptural experiences. We see lots of times in the early church that happen, and we'll see that this weekend in the book of Acts as well. So if you're thinking about it, man, it could be the weekend for you. If you have questions you want asked before the weekend, reach out to us and let us know. And maybe this weekend God's just going to prompt you. I hear lots of it where somebody's like, I know I need to do that. God's calling me to do that. And maybe this weekend is just one more push that God's going to give for you to do it.
Yep. Yeah, if you need any encouragement this week, you can text our team, 650-600-0402. Phil, thanks so much for everything. Happy finish and good luck with the start.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you
guys
soon.